Hello and welcome to APA's presentation, Playing the Long Game in Becoming a Recognized Expert. I'm Peggy Mihalik, Senior Director of Member Content here at APA. Some important points before we get started. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and may not reflect the views or policies of the American Psychological Association. Next, this program does not offer CE. However, we will email everyone watching live today a certificate of attendance. Note, you must watch for a minimum of 45 minutes to receive the certificate. During our time together, you will be on mute. You can communicate to us using the questions box located in your webinar viewing screen. If you have a question for our presenter, you can type them in using the questions box located in your webinar viewing screen. And now for our speaker. Dorie Clark has been named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She is a keynote speaker and teaches executive education at Duke University. Dorie is also the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Long Game, Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Standout, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. A former presidential campaign spokeswoman, she writes frequently for the Harvard Business Review. Welcome, Dorie.
Well, hello, Peggy, and hi, everyone. So good to be here and to talk to you today about becoming a recognized expert and playing the long game of doing it. I recently wrote a book called The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And certainly when it comes to becoming recognized for your expertise, it would be fantastic if this were a fast process. It isn't necessarily, but there are things that we can do to be smart and strategic about it and use it as a way of growing your practice, growing your referrals, and being able to do more of the great work that you already do in reaching people and helping them. So let's go ahead and dive in. And we're definitely going to have time for questions at the end. And so I'm excited to engage with you and hear your thoughts about all of this. So, first of all, a scenario that a lot of folks have, and I would venture to say a lot of psychologists have, is you are great at what you do. I mean, obviously, you are a highly educated, highly trained, highly regulated professional. You know what you're doing, and you are able to help a lot of people. But sometimes you may be in a situation where your practice is not as full as you want it to be, or maybe you are just not able to command the rates that you want. Maybe you would like to be able to, switch over or level up into a different type of work. Maybe it's a more specialized kind of work that you want to be doing. But for whatever reason, I mean, there's a lot of noise out there, right? It's hard for that message to get through. And obviously, because you are a well-trained, respected professional, you're not exactly going to buy a billboard on I-95. You're not exactly going to be, waving your flag like a used car salesman, right? You need to make sure that the ways that you are conveying your expertise are commensurate with your dignity and the dignity of the profession. So how do we do that? How do we thread that needle to make sure that the right people actually know about who you are, what you're capable of? And so there's a wider audience out there that is actively seeking you out, because we all know this. It's a million times better for people to be coming to you rather than you having to be worried or stressed out somehow about how to fill your practice. So, it can feel sometimes like we're in this incredibly crowded marketplace, right? Like, oh my God, who isn't a psychologist? Or, maybe even worse, who isn't a coach with no credentials? It can feel like enormously hard to be able to get across what separates you, what makes you unique. But those are the things that we need to be able to do so that hopefully it creates the snowball so that downstream or down the mountain, you're doing a lot less work, right? I mean, the state that I think most of us want to be in is being recognized for our expertise. We're getting referrals, we're getting people seeking us out directly. We're getting, depending on what type of practice you have or how you work, maybe you're getting job offers, maybe you're getting people who want to partner or ally with you in some way. but it's inbound. It is unsolicited inbound requests, rather than always feeling like we have to be lifting the boulder up the hill, right? That's not what any of us wants to have to worry about after we've invested so much time in building your expertise and actually getting good at what you're doing. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about these questions. I've really spent the past decade plus really trying to understand how to bring the principles of strategy and strategic thinking to bear in our own lives and in our own careers. And so this book, The Long Game, is kind of the fruit of that. And today I want to share with you some of the topics that I talk about in it and some of my other books that I've written in the past, in hopes that it can be helpful to you as you think through how to create the kind of practice and the kind of business that you want, that feels easy, that feels like, not so hard, but is meaningful, lucrative, fulfilling, and enables you to make the kind of impact that you want. And that's why you got into psychology to begin with. So as I was researching The Long Game, I came across something I thought was quite interesting. So Jeff Bezos, he now is emeritus, but during the time that he was CEO of Amazon, every year he would write a letter to shareholders and just explain what had happened that year, his vision for the company, et cetera. And one really interesting shareholder letter he wrote in 2018 to Amazon shareholders, he told a story about a friend of his. And this friend decided, you really can hire someone for anything. The friend decided to hire a handstand coach so that she could get better at doing yoga handstands. Now, it turns out, according to this yoga handstand coach, that the average person, if you ask them sort of on the street, like a pop quiz, how long does it take to become proficient at doing yoga handstands? The average person will guess that it's about 2 weeks worth of practice. It turns out, and many of you here who are yogis and yoginis are probably like laughing to yourself, that is not at all correct. It actually takes closer to 6 months of daily practice to become proficient at doing yoga handstands. So while we know that most people, if they haven't put a lot of thought into this, they'd probably recognize like, okay, well, it's a guess, right? I might be wrong. They might think they're wrong by, 10%, 20%, maybe 30%, right? It turns out they are wrong by a factor of 12x, 2 weeks versus 24 weeks. That is an enormous margin. And similarly, you can imagine a scenario where someone, let's say they're on week 12 of practicing their yoga handstands. If they have this erroneous, unquestioned assumption of what it takes to actually get there and to do a yoga handstand, they might quite rationally give up because they say, well, oh my gosh, I thought it would take a couple of weeks. I've been doing it 6 times longer than that for 3 months. Every day I've been doing this. I still am not getting anywhere. I must be terrible at this, or it just must not work for me. Therefore, I will give up, and they will feel perfectly entitled to do so. And yet they haven't even put in half the time that would have been necessary. Now, the moral of this story is, first of all, I'm a big believer in scoping up front so that we actually understand really clearly and as accurately as possible what it takes to get the results that we want. But number two, I think it is important to lay out some expectations. I have spent the past decade really trying to understand and to crack the nut of what it takes to become a recognized expert in your field. And what I've come to realize is that, this, and I want to be totally honest and transparent with you about this because it's really important to recognize what it takes in the process so that you don't get discouraged too quickly, so that you are able to pace yourself so you can persevere, because it is worth it. It is absolutely worth it to make the investment so that for the rest of your career, the right people are seeking you out. But generally, I run a community called Recognized Expert for people who are working on this. And I have seen over, the past 6 years that I've been doing it, we've had 700 people in the community. So I've gotten to see a real cross section of experience. And what I have found is that it takes between 2 to 3 years of quite active effort to see, in some cases, almost any result from working to get your expertise recognized. And it takes about 5 years of effort to really see a demonstrable difference. It sounds like a lot, but I also want to say that by the time you actually have put in that effort, you have actually created a competitive moat for yourself, because hardly anyone else is willing to put in that effort. This is very much a case of you being rewarded for the time and the slog that you do it. There is a real period of time, those first couple of years where you're like, why am I spending my discretionary time and effort worrying about this or working on this? Am I getting anywhere? And it may feel incredibly frustrating, but it is so important to keep going, because pushing past that barrier is what enables you to open up the gap between yourself and everybody else, and really to make sure that you get known in the marketplace the way that you should and the way that you deserve to. You've probably all heard the saying, in fact, you probably used it with your patients, right? That the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the next best time is today, because today is what we can control. So I have seen the benefits, certainly in my own life and in the lives of the clients that I work with, around working to get your expertise seen and heard and recognized. It becomes, frankly, a heck of a lot more satisfying to do your job when you're reaching more people. They're more eager and excited to receive that message, and you get to work less hard on the acquisition process. So I think it really is worth it. But it is something that takes some effort. So if you bought in with me so far, and if you want to learn more about this, let's dive into actually what these components are. Because what I have discovered in my research is that there are 3 key components of becoming a recognized expert. And these are the things that actually move the needle. They all work together, they work in concert, and they enable you to really create a flywheel that brings people to you and enables them to recognize what you have to offer. So they are, I will go into more depth about each of these, but briefly, they are content creation. This means finding ways to share your ideas publicly so that people know about your ideas. They know what you think. They know that you have expertise in a certain area, whether it's trauma recovery or addiction or body issues or divorce or, who knows what. There's a million things, but it's really useful when people are able in advance to say, oh my gosh, he gets me. I know I want to go to him because I don't have to explain the whole, issue. He's already seen a million of this. I know he'll be able to help me, right? It's enormously valuable. Social proof is enormously important. Social proof is basically, you're probably familiar with this term, you are psychologists, but basically, the way that I'm borrowing this here is in the vein of how Robert Cialdini, the author of Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, talks about it. It is essentially credibility at a glance. How is it that people who, whether they're the media, whether they're referral partners, whether they're potential patients or people in the community, how do they tell quickly that you are credible, that you are someone who is worth sending a referral to, or that you're somebody who that they can just feel good going to because they know that you're smart, you're well-trained, you're on top of it, et cetera? How can we quickly convey that at a glance in a world where people are so busy, they're not really going to take that much time to read up on you or, analyze your credentials, et cetera. And then finally, your network is really important because, again, obviously when it comes to referrals, that's a big deal, but it's also true that your network enables you to have access to, better ideas, to best practices, to, sources of support, and to people who can amplify the word about your best ideas. So I want to share with you some strategies about all of these things and how they play out and how they manifest and how you can use them. But I also just want to mention, in case it's helpful and in case it's useful, I have a free tool, a free resource that you can get if you'd like. It's the Recognized Expert Self-Evaluation Toolkit. And you can get it at DorieClark.com and DorieClark.com/toolkit right there. And what's useful about it, it is a scored self-assessment. It takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes to do, but you actually get a score. And then based on that score, it provides a sort of prescription about where you can probably get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of applying your time and your effort and your energy. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, content, social proof network, where do I even start? That actually can help answer the question, because based on your score, it can provide that. So again, it's dorieclark.com/toolkit. So let's actually roll up our sleeves and dive into some of these things, right? So content creation, what does it look like? What does it mean? Well, the good news, hydration, so important. The good news about content creation, sometimes people say to me, oh, I couldn't do that, I'm not a writer. And I really want to stress that this is not about writing per se, right? I mean, that could be a strategy for sure. That's certainly one way of conveying content, but a lot of people aren't writers. It's okay. It doesn't matter. I am extremely platform agnostic when it comes to content creation. The key part is that if you really want to be recognized for your expertise, what you have to do is give people a way to discover what your ideas are. If you create zero content, what can happen is basically how are you going to build your practice? Well, there's two ways, right? One is that people are just going to essentially flip through the phone book. They're going to see okay, Blue Cross Blue Shield, who takes that? Oh, okay, their name sounds nice. Certainly you can get patients that way. It's probably not optimal, but it works. The other, of course, is referrals from current patients, and that's great. That's always, a really nice thing. But as you can imagine, referrals from existing patients is not super scalable, right? I mean, it's usually not like one person is going to tell 10 of their friends to go to you. It might be like one or maybe two. And then there's some people who, they're just not like good referrers in general. So you're not going to get any referrals. It's incremental growth, but it's not exponential growth. So ideally, if you want to build a practice area in a certain vein, it pays to share your ideas publicly so that other people will know what they are, so that they can essentially try before they buy. And even in advance of setting up an appointment with you, they're like, oh, wow, I love how she thinks about this. That's fantastic. I really want to go to her, so that they're actively seeking you out. Now, many people who are research psychologists, they're publishing academic papers and things like that. That's great. God bless. It's an excellent way to do it. But what I'm talking about is, and where my area of expertise is kind of the popular press, you could say. So, I mean, for instance, again, this all sort of depends on the type of thing you do, but like LinkedIn lives or Facebook lives, Instagram lives, there's a lot of things where you can be talking about things, interviewing people, sharing ideas and expertise in that way. And it doesn't involve writing. Podcasting is another great thing. I mean, some of you guys probably have listened to Esther Perel, and she has these couples therapy podcasts that she does that are super popular. I think it was on Audible for a while now. It's on Spotify. So in those cases, it's actually people who sign waivers, and you can actually hear her sessions, which is very interesting. But there's plenty of precedent for either you riffing yourself or having an interview with an expert or a colleague or something like that. So podcasting could be a great way, again, if you're more comfortable in talking rather than in writing. And these are just images of clients of mine that I've worked with. Darren, who did the LinkedIn Live. This is a guy named Robbie Samuels, who has a podcast and has done, I don't know, at this point, probably 300 plus episodes of it, which is incidentally a great networking tool as well. Also, working to write for high profile publications can be a big deal. Talk about building credibility and simultaneously building social proof. You are simultaneously getting your idea out there, which, matters in terms of creating content, but also just the fact that you've written for a high profile publication, often can be a good form of social proof in the mind of someone who might be thinking of coming to you or might discover you through that way. So again, this is a guy who was in one of my masterminds, Dirk, he's a public health doctor at Emory. And he wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review, which is pretty cool. But again, depending on your area of specialization, it could be anything from Psychology Today, or, maybe if you're kind of a little more in the wellness space, like Thrive Global, which incidentally, anybody can write for that. That is, a publicly accessible platform. Same with Medium. You don't have to be approved or pitch or anything like that. If you're sort of more in the leadership psychology space, organizational psychology, maybe Harvard Business Review or a Fast Company is a great place. And, of course, you need to strategize about, who do I know who writes for them? Would they be willing to introduce me? Or is there a way I could pitch the editor directly? You have to think those pieces through, but making the effort around writing for high profile publications is something that can carry big dividends and is perhaps worth considering. So those are some initial ideas for content creation. And of course, we can and will spend plenty more time answering your questions about all of this, but this is really just kind of teeing up possibilities. Now, for social proof, right? How do we, at a glance, show people in a super crowded world where, there's, a million psychologists, or at least it feels that way? How do we show them that we're credible? Well, one handy way, which kind of ties into this, is getting quoted in the media. And interestingly, you can really begin to create a virtuous circle. So if you are writing, for instance, if you're creating your own content, writing, or who knows, podcasting, videos, whatever you're doing, that creates a way that reporters can find you. Because the truth is, if a reporter is working on a story, literally the very first thing they're going to do if they need to find an expert is they're going to do a Google search. They're going to see who's already talking about this, who's already writing about this. So this is a member of my recognized expert community, Sarah. She's a physician. And she says, I was approached by a writer from Condé Nast. I asked her how she found me. And she said, through your articles online, your name just kept coming up. Boom. So there actually is a secondary follow-on benefit to content creation as well, which can redound to your benefit in terms of social proof. Also, giving talks can be worthwhile. Some of you may have already given, for instance, like a TEDx talk. And if you haven't, that's a great thing to consider. Just about every community these days has them. If you want to apply there, you can actually go to the TED.com website, and there's a page listing all of the upcoming TEDx's. And for many of them, they actually have a call for speakers where you could apply and, apply to share some of your insights and strategies. And of course, as you know, the goal of a TED or a TEDx talk is to try to be broadly helpful to a wide swath of the audience. But if you have a message that you feel it could be useful, it really can have dramatic benefits. This is a client of mine named Liz Kislik. She's terrific. She did a talk about conflict at work. And this is not like big, quote unquote, big TED, right? She was not on the stage in Vancouver. Literally, you can see her TEDx Baylor School. She was speaking at a K-12 school. This is, not a quote unquote big deal. And yet, the really cool thing about a TEDx talk is that if the talk is good and if the talk proves popular, it can get traction. It can get picked up. Right now, it's the screenshot I took it, whatever number of months ago. It was at 182,000 views. It's over 300,000 views now of people that saw, Liz's talk. I mean, she did it for like 50 people at a school. Now 300,000 people have found it, and she has gotten clients as a result of people discovering her for this talk. So giving public speeches in a public venue is another really great way of being able to gather social proof and enable people to find you. Additionally, I want to tell you about a resource that you may potentially be familiar with, but if you're not, it's useful. It is called HARO. That stands for Help a Reporter Out. You can Google it, and you can see this little clip here. This is a member of my recognized expert community, Bob, who managed to get quoted in USA Today as a result of HARO. So what this basically is, it's like a two-sided marketplace. It's a free service, but basically what happens is if I'm a reporter and if I need an expert source on something, I will write into HARO and say, oh, I need an expert source to talk to me about blah, 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 the latest strategies in combating burnout. Okay, great. So I put that out there, and then the HARO people gather it and they create a newsletter, and you subscribe to this newsletter. They send out it's a lot of emails, admittedly, but you don't have to read them all. But 3 times a day, they send out an email with all of the queries. And so they're grouped by category. So you can look through them. And if you feel like, oh my gosh, well, I'm an expert in burnout, I could advise that person, you can then click and submit your response. And it sort of matches you guys. And if the reporter likes it, they may well use it, and you can end up quoted in some pretty high profile places. So that's a cool free resource that I hope might be interesting. And then another one, I'm sure many of you probably already are plugged into this in some way, but guest lecturing or teaching at universities is, of course, another really great way to gather social proof. Again, you can just, if you step into the mind of a prospective patient, they don't know how to evaluate who's a good psychologist or not, right? Like, they're not an expert, they have no idea. And it feels a little risky, like, I guess I'll just like pick somebody and then I'll have a session, or maybe I can't tell in the first session, maybe I'll have a few sessions and I'll see if I click with them. But you're already like hundreds of dollars, quote unquote, down the drain if you don't connect with that person. And then you got to do it all over again, talking about all your problems. It feels very hard. It feels very, risky or onerous. And so what we want to do, if you're a psychologist, you want to try to de-risk it for the patient as much as possible, so that they don't feel like, oh God, I'm rolling the dice seeing this person. You want them to feel good in advance. Like, oh yeah, this person's super credible. I've read stuff they've come up with. We're like totally on the same page. I'm excited to come in and see this person. I know they can help me. So guest lecturing or teaching is great, because essentially, in the mind of the prospective patient, the university has essentially done the heavy lifting for them of determining whether you are credible. They've said, yes, you're credible enough, we'll put you in front of students. And so cultivating that kind of affiliation can be great. Now, I'm assuming, you're a psychologist, so probably you all have a PhD in psychology or some equivalent degree. And, maybe you trained overseas or something like that. But basically, you mostly have that, I imagine. And so therefore, you have a university that you probably have fairly tight connections to. It is almost always easier to kind of worm your way in with the people who already know you. I started teaching business school executive education about a decade ago, and actually, I don't have a doctorate. I don't have a business degree. I have a master's degree in theology. So, it's a little off topic here. So it was an open question, who would let me teach at their business school? Now, as it happens, a decade later, I teach at 2 of America's top 10 business schools, at Duke and Columbia. But I sort of worked my way up, starting with my alma mater, Smith College, which actually has an executive education program. So a really good starting place is actually, if you're not plugged in academia, you can go back to your old professors, basically, and just be like, hey, do you ever need anybody to guest lecture about X or Y? I'd be glad to do it. And then that way, when you have the first one under your belt, it becomes far easier to reach out, because again, we want to save, you know this better than I do, right? These are concepts from psychology. People are cognitive misers. So we want to save them the effort and the trouble of thinking like, oh, is this person qualified? So similarly, if you have done one guest lecture, you've taught one adjunct course or whatever, you can then go to the one in your community, or you can go to one that's like even more prestigious and say, oh, well, I've already done it for these people. And then these folks in academia are like, well, okay, obviously she knows what she's doing because she's already guest lectured, so she knows what it's like, blah, blah. Of course, we will say yes. So it becomes a really great way to build those credentials. And frankly, it might be just fun for you. Teaching can be really fun and meaningful. So those are some good ways to build up social proof. And then the last category of becoming a recognized expert, this process is about building your network. So I want to talk about that briefly, and then share with you 3 key principles of how to really push through the long game in this, the sort of frustrations, the roadblocks that we encounter, and how to deal with that successfully. And then we will open up for your questions. So I'm really excited about all of that. And I see there's questions and there's comments in the chat coming through already, which is sensational. So, I'm eager to hear what's on your mind. But the last piece, so we've been talking about content creation, We've been talking about social proof. So let's talk about network. And, the good news, yay, is that in most of the country, things are opening up more. So, we're finally, after 2 years, able to reconvene in person in many ways. In a fashion that we have not been able to do for the past couple of years. So it's so nice. It's so, it feels so good to be able to do that. But this is actually a great time. I mean, now people have been a little bit starved for connection and companionship. So organizing, I mean, you can think about how you want to do this or who you want to connect with, but, fellow practitioners or, people in your field, people you want to get to know better. This is a great opportunity to invite somebody to lunch one-on-one, to organize a group gathering. There's a lot of possibilities, and people are much more likely now to say yes than they perhaps might have been in the past, because it's just like, oh my gosh, I really want to get back into this. How nice to be invited. So I encourage all of you to, think of yourselves, to feel empowered, to think of yourselves as a convener, because this is a great moment to do it. And of course, if you want to convene a group that is across the country, or, maybe if you're in a place where you just don't quite feel comfortable doing it in person yet, that's okay. That's all cool too. I actually have a great client, a psychologist named Constance Dierks, who created a group during Zoom. I thought this was so innovative. It was a group specifically for psychologists in the leadership space, sort of OD world kind of stuff. And she ran this group for, I don't know, so maybe 6 or 8 psychologists, and every month or every couple of weeks, whatever it was, they would get together on Zoom and they would talk about articles that they were writing and projects that they were working on, research that they were doing. And it was very fun and very meaningful for them during the pandemic. So, you can think expansively about who you want to bring together, who you want to network with. Maybe it's, classmates. Maybe it's people you got your degree with or did certain pieces of your training with. Maybe it's folks who are now in your area of specialization. You can go in a million directions. But it's really powerful to bring people together and to be conscious about networking, because I think for a lot of us over the past couple of years, and I'm sure you probably saw this in yourself and also in your patients, we let some of our weak ties atrophy a little bit. And I think now it's time to recalibrate and rebalance the portfolio just a bit. So, and it might be fun, frankly. So those are the pieces about becoming a recognized expert: content creation, social proof, and your network. And so now, very briefly, I wanted to talk about playing the long game and how that all factors in. So let's dive in. All right. So the first piece that I think bears mentioning is that, the frustrating thing about attaining a goal that is worthwhile, a goal that just about all of us would agree is meaningful, really doing the things necessary to be recognized by your peers, by the people you respect as being an expert in your field. It doesn't happen overnight, because obviously everybody would be doing it then. We get sidetracked many times by the minutiae of everyday life. And I have huge empathy for that, because, this happens to me too. There was a study that was done a few years ago of 10,000 senior leaders. And they said 97% said that strategic thinking, long-term thinking was the most important thing they could be doing for their success and their company's success. And meanwhile, a separate study that was done around the same time said that 96% of leaders said they didn't have time for strategic thinking. And I can empathize. You probably can too, right? What is true for leaders in the business world is just as true for psychologists who are balancing busy practice loads, trying to network, trying to connect with people, doing paperwork, supervising your staff, all the ridiculous mishigas that you have to worry about. It can be hard to really take that long-term viewpoint. We know intellectually, oh yeah, then, besides 20 years ago, the next best time is today. But it seems so often easy to kick things down the road so that we are responding to the urgent. We're not doing the important. But I want to stress to you that, and I think you're voting with your feet in the sense that you are on this webinar for a reason, because you believe that it is interesting. You believe that it is important, at least potentially, to amp up the level of recognition that you receive for your expertise. You want to do that. It involves an investment. It involves asking ourselves, what is the thing that we could do today that will make tomorrow better and easier? And it's not easy to do that, but it is absolutely worthwhile to do that. And so what I want to say is that the good news is that it takes consistent effort over time, but it does not necessarily take enormous effort. Even small things compounded can make a really big difference. Taking the time once a week to write an article, or taking the time once a week to reconnect with a dormant tie of somebody that you haven't talked to for a long time, and just sending them a message on LinkedIn or suggesting a Zoom call or something like that. Those actions build up and compound. Now, number two, one of the concepts that I talk about in the long game is what I call watching for the raindrops, because the truth is, again, I was thinking about, like, what is the right metaphor for this journey of working to build up the kind of practice that you want, the kind of career that you want. And, at first I was thinking, well, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? But that's not quite right, because honestly, some of you guys have run marathons. Some of you have been to marathons. And I will tell you, when you are running a marathon, there are people on the sidelines screaming to cheer you on. And it is hard. It's physically hard to run a marathon, but knowing that people support you and that they believe in you and that they have your back, that helps propel people onward. The hard part about working to become a recognized expert is it's like running a marathon on an empty course by yourself with nobody there to cheer you on. Because for a long time, you are making an extra effort. You're already tired. You're already busy. You already have a lot of things to do. And yet you're staying up late to write that article for Medium or Psychology Today. You are making the effort, even when you are super tired after work, to go out and go to a dinner with somebody so that you can build and nurture a relationship, because, who knows, they're an interesting person. And in 10 years, we never even know how you could help them or how they could help you. You're doing these things and it may feel thankless at the time. And other people may say, why are you doing that? You're not getting anywhere. 3 people read that article. And of course, right? Sometimes your own voice is saying that. It can feel like a slog. And the hard part, I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review about this last fall. There's some interesting work by David Galenson at the University of Chicago talking about this. Some people, like in the art world, for instance, like Pablo Picasso, he was famous pretty much from the time he was 20, just famous all the way along. That's great for him, right? His work he got paid a lot of money for his work. Everybody respected him. Everybody respected what he did. Meanwhile, you have somebody like Cezanne, and we think of Cezanne now, and we think, oh, he's a great painter. Yeah, everybody knows that. Well, not everybody knew that. And until his late 40s, basically everybody in his life thought Cezanne was a loser, and his art was not selling. Nobody was impressed. And he even wondered if he was doing anything right. That can be incredibly hard. But if we are going to get to the other side of that tunnel, we have to persevere. That's how we get to the good stuff. That's how we do separate ourselves out, so that in all that noise, we are able to make sure that the right people have heard about us and have found us. And what that involves, I call it looking for the raindrops, because so often I think in our imagination, or the popular imagination, what people look for as, the signs of success are like the big kill, right? Like, oh, it's the best-selling book, it's the keynote speech at the conference or whatever. But it takes a long time to get to that. And it can feel really demoralizing along the way if you're not getting a lot of feedback. And that's why it is so important to train ourselves to look for these small breadcrumbs of success, the tiny raindrops that show you that eventually a storm is building. Eventually there will be a full-on thunderstorm of recognition. But in the beginning, it might not look like much. It might look like, oh, you have an email list. Well, gosh, it used to be that 5 people signed up a week and now it's 7. Well, on the surface, you might say, that's so lame, like that's not any different at all. But actually it is nearly, I'm not amazing at math, but it's like 50% growth close to, and that actually really does matter. Sometimes progress is invisible to the naked eye. Maybe it's about, again, slowly at first, but starting to get more inbound inquiries, more people calling you up, more people saying that they've heard of you. Maybe it's having the media reach out to you for comment. And at first, it's not famous publications. At first, it's, random publications from random places. But it's a sign, and it shows that people are paying attention. And we have to see that. We have to honor that, because that's how we can have the patience and the perseverance to be able to do what's necessary to get our ideas recognized. And the last question, the last thing that I think is always useful for us to think about, I know that any of this topic, we're touching on a little bit about, personal brand or self-promotion. We're touching a little bit on business development. And these are topics that are often freighted. They're often fraught. Again, especially among people who are smart, they're highly educated, and there's kind of, sometimes, again, not for everybody, but sometimes there's a little bit of a knee jerk, like, well, shouldn't my credentials speak for themselves? And of course, yes, of course, in an ideal world, they should. But we know that, again, because people are cognitive misers, we just can't count on that. And we're going to be sad and bitter and frustrated for a long time if we're counting on the world to be different than it is. So we're going to have to meet it halfway. And that does not mean being some, crass, trashy self-promoter. Absolutely not. But what it does mean is that it's like a beacon, right? If you were a lighthouse, you can't expect anyone to find you if you don't turn your light on. So we need to at least turn the light on by putting out content, or by making ourselves findable, by, enhancing and thinking about our social proof, so that when people do find us, they say, oh, wow, well, he looks really like he'd be perfect. And it makes it a lot easier. And so I think there's ways to do it in an authentic way. There's ways to do it with integrity to ourselves. And so in my book, The Long Game, I tell the story of this friend of mine, Alyssa Cohn. she's an executive coach, and she did, this is a rap video she did. And the reason she did this rap video about her practice is that she was a big fan of Hamilton and anything that Lin-Manuel Miranda did. And so she found out that he did, this became a Broadway show, something called Freestyle Love Supreme, which is a hip hop improv beatbox rap sort of show that they do. But Lin and his friends also created Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, which trains regular people in how to do freestyle improv rap. So really, without a lot of research, she was like, oh, well, I love him. Let me sign up. So she signs up for this class. She thinks it'll be kind of a lark. And she goes there, and this is pre-COVID. She immediately discovers it's like basically her and a bunch of 20-year-old guys in hoodies that all already know how to rap. And so she was just so like embarrassed and stunned. They go around and they're just like asking people to like do a warm up basically. And she like can't even do the warm up. She can't even bring herself. She's like, pass. And she just felt so bad. And so at the end of the night, she emails the instructor. She says, oh, I'm so sorry to waste your time. I think I'm in the wrong place. I think I should drop out. And he wrote back with some very wise words. And again, they're probably not dissimilar to things that you've told your patients and the people in your life. He said, Alyssa, he said, I don't think you signed up to the class to become a professional rapper. He said, the reason we do this class is to help you become a more creative and uninhibited person. And she read that back and she thought, you know what, that's right. That's actually why I signed up for this class, is because I did want to be a more creative and uninhibited person. And so she decided to move forward with it. She completed the class just before COVID lockdown. She did a rap concert that she invited all her friends to, and she subsequently made this rap video that's up on YouTube. But I think a good North Star for all of us is to really just sort of ask that question, well, what kind of person do you want to be? And what do you want to accomplish? Because you're already doing great things. You're already helping people. You're already helping patients and the people in your life. That's fantastic. But if you additionally want to have an even bigger impact, if you want to reach more people, if you want that to be able to be done with more ease and less stress, then putting in the time now to help the future you, to help make you more findable to other people so that your expertise is clear to them and they seek you out. That is really what we're talking about. And I've seen it. I've seen the value of it in my own work. I've seen it in the value of the folks that I coach and work with. And I hope it can be valuable for you too. And so I hope some of these principles or ideas have been useful. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and your questions with all of this. I mean, ultimately, you're busy people. You don't have to do everything for sure. Nobody has time for it. But even if there's one thing that you want to try, one thing you want to experiment with, it can be really quite powerful and make a big difference in your practice. And so with that, I know Peggy has been collecting different questions and things like that. Additionally, if you're interested, I talked to you about the toolkit beforehand. If you're interested in going down the rabbit hole on strategy, I'll just mention one more free resource, which is the strategic thinking self-assessment. That's DorieClark.com/the long game. You can get that for free. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. And Peggy, what have we got on tap here? What's on people's minds?
Oh, we've got so much. People have been just really connecting with your presentation and flooding us with amazing questions. So we're just going to get right to them because we're going to run out of time really fast. So what is the easiest and quickest way to be recognized?
All right, easy and quick. Yes, I mean, of course, now we've had this whole hour where I'm like, it's
right,
not,
where it's
not
a
quick,
slog.
it's easy, blah, blah. But I would say, if we're thinking about literally where do we start, I think that the toolkit that I mentioned can be helpful, DorieClark.com/toolkit, because it can provide some personalized advice about where you are. But if I was advising, I actually think that probably one of the best early investments, if we're choosing which area to focus on, I would say if this is an area where you're not already super strong, focus on social proof first, because those are things, if you do them once, they can never take them away from you, right? In your bio, it really is helpful if you say, oh, well, she's been quoted in, whatever, in Psychology Today and People Magazine and the Harvard Business Review and whatever. All you need is to be quoted in that publication once. It doesn't matter if it was 1996, but it remains true. And so putting in the effort now will have benefits that redound to you for the rest of your career.
All right. Another question is, how do I fight through the insecurity of feeling like I don't know enough to be an expert?
Yeah, this is a really common one. And, first of all, you guys know better than I do about imposter syndrome, right? I mean, you've probably been treating that for years, writing papers about that for years. So, right? This is like very common human phenomenon. That being said, I think that we have a problem sometimes in where we focus, because what we focus on is the people who are kind of, the exemplars and the people that are more successful than us. Oh, wow, Brene Brown, what a beautiful speaker. I'll never speak like Brene Brown. Well, okay, that's great. I mean, she's awesome. She's a superstar, but also, isn't it true, I say, scratching my chin, isn't it true that sometimes you read something, you read an article, or you see a speaker at a conference and you're like, oh my God, where did that guy come from? What an idiot. Why did they let him do that? Right? Like, it's not, I guarantee you, it's not like literally every other person you see is like better than you. Like, I am sure that some of you guys see people that you think are worse than you. And I will suggest to you, not in a mean way, but focus there, because the truth is, if they can do it, I promise you can do it. And so we just need to like really retrain our energy and be like, you know what? I don't know the most, but I'm better than that guy. And hopefully that will give you confidence.
Awesome. This is a similar question. You might have the same sort of response or maybe something additional. What tips do you have for introverts for getting out there? It's very hard for them to break into social circles that already exist because they're just so introverted.
Yes. Well, okay. So I do have some suggestions. So I've written a couple of articles. You can Google them. They're available for free. I think it's like metered access, but they're available for free up to a certain number on the Harvard Business Review website. But if you type in my name, in the search box, Dorie Clark and introvert, I did an article. I did one about networking for introverts and I did one about personal branding for introverts. So you can find those. But the short version that I will say, first of all, I am an introvert. And everybody's like, no, you're not. But right? Again, psychologists, more than the average bear. So you understand that it is not that I don't like people. It's not that I can't step up and, do the mic. It's that I get tired from social encounters, that's the issue. And so a lot of us are like that, including myself. And so what I have come to realize, ironically, is that actually being the host as an introvert is the far better move, because sometimes we hesitate to go to events with good reason, because oftentimes extroverts, frankly, are a little careless in their planning because they're like, oh, I'll just have a group of people and we'll throw them together and they'll love it and everybody will talk. And it's like, no, no, no. As an introvert, that sounds like a nightmare. I do not like fending for myself in a swamp. Thank you. But if I'm the host, I can structure that meeting the way that I want. And so literally I'm doing this. Tomorrow, I'm hosting an 8-person dinner at a restaurant. And what did I do? I sent an email out today with everybody's contact information, with a bio of that person, with a link to their LinkedIn profile, so that people can research in advance. So they know who's going to be there. They know what the deal is. They can think in advance about, what they want to say to somebody or who they want to talk to. Feels much more controlled and contained. So if you don't like how events are structured, structure your own events and you can make them just right for you.
All right. Here's a great question. In academia, national and international reputation building is part of our promotional process. These are things like being asked to review grants, being invited to speak, and to organize symposia. We are, of course, expected to publish research articles, but this tends to be a drop in the ocean. What are some ways to promote the content we're already creating?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I like to talk about, actually, and I wrote a book called Stand Out, focused on this, is about how you can create essentially one thing, but make it count 10 times. Because the truth is, if we actually thought about it separately, oh my gosh, I need to create something for LinkedIn, and then I need to create something for YouTube, and then I need to, and it's like, oh, I'm tired already. Nobody has time for that. But I think that the real question to ask ourselves is okay, if I am bothering to create one piece of content, how do I make it count 10 times? So let's pretend you wrote an academic paper. You could, let's just imagine you're on all these social channels. You could, for instance, write up a paragraph long, with bullet points summary of the highlights of that study and post it on LinkedIn. You could do a 1 minute or 30-second video of yourself on Instagram talking about the highlights and just, discussing it. You could, make a quote card with the salient pull quote or the number one takeaway and put that on Twitter. I'm making things up here, but it's an example of how to take the same core content and deploy it in different places to help spread the word.
Okay. Is there anything you would recommend doing while a student? We have a lot of young people tuning in to prepare for becoming a recognized expert after graduation.
One of my favorite activities to suggest, especially for people who are younger in their career and, they may feel, it doesn't always overlap, but sometimes, people might say, well, I'm not an expert yet, or I don't know what area of expertise I want to focus in on. That's great. That's fine. Something you can literally start to do now, which not only increases your network, your professional development and your growth, and helps bring you further along the path of knowing what your expertise is, is by interviewing other people. So if you were a student, I would say, depending on your preference and predilection, start a podcast or a video series or a blog or something like that, and try to make an effort to interview luminaries in your field. That way you can get to know them. They can be, analyzed later on. These are the people who can write you recommendation letters, or maybe collaborate with you on a project or something like that, right? You become obviously much more familiar with their work through the process of interviewing them and researching and planning for that interview. And even though you are not, creating unique content per se, I mean, you're really highlighting their work, you actually technically kind of get credit for it, because it's like, well, you wrote the article, even if it's, their ideas that you're quoting, you put it together. And so it helps familiarize your name in people's minds.
Okay. We've had a couple people ask about charging fees. At what point can I charge a fee for being an expert? And what might be a reasonable fee to start with?
Good question. I am not entirely sure what context we're talking about exactly, because I'm assuming, if you're a psychologist, like seeing patients, presumably you're charging a fee for that, right? For some people, there's expert witness things like in courtrooms. For some people, again, if you're an organizational psychologist, maybe there's consulting work that you might do for a corporation. And so each of those things kind of has its own norms with regard to pricing. But what I would say is, first of all, I will point you to the work of Alan Weiss, who is a great writer around this topic. He propounds a philosophy called value-based fees that's quite useful. He has a book of that same title, Value-Based Fees. And so it's just kind of a useful way to think about it and to think about pricing. But I would say also one of the most important things you can do is to start to create friends and colleagues who are in a similar space, because one of the disadvantages that a lot of professionals have is the buyers, the people on the other side, they see all the bids, they see all of the proposals and the pricing, they know what things cost. But if we don't have friends who are doing similar things, and sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want friends, who are doing this because they'd be my competitors. Don't think that way. You're really only competing against yourself. You need friends who are doing similar things, because you need to have intel, which you can only get from friends, about what the actual market value of things are, so that you can price yourself accordingly, in terms of where your positioning and experience level is.
Okay. This question is about sort of some of the racial inequalities to challenges faced by certain disadvantaged groups to get a seat at the table. Do you have any suggestions for how these someone in this group, or someone in these people in these groups, how they can break through and become a recognized expert?
Well, I think, let me take a couple of pieces of this, and I know our time is running short, so I'll be quick. But I think that one thing that is helpful for everybody is if there are people that you admire, if there are people, and I hope there are, where you're like, oh, wow, I would love their career. I really admire what they're doing. Hopefully there's, multiple ones. Try to reverse engineer their background, right? See, what did they do? Literally, what were the steps? How did they get there? And, oh, okay, they did this before this, that before that, and understand how they got there. And then essentially try to replicate that. And, I think about somebody that I interviewed. I have a weekly Newsweek interview show named Robert Refkin, who is the super successful founder of Compass Real Estate, himself African-American. And this was a strategy that he used, where he was reverse engineering people's biographies. And he was like, oh, this person I admire was a White House fellow. How do I become a White House fellow? And it sort of provides you a play-by-play map, because it gives you a way to think about, okay, how can I network my way in? The truth is, first of all, lots of people are disadvantaged in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we are thoughtful about, just pushing ourselves forward and networking and making connections. I think that first of all, people are actually almost always really quite open to it. And second of all, what's interesting is that the thing that might make it feel harder at the beginning to break in, because, oh my gosh, there's not enough people who look like me. I'd sort of stand out like a sore thumb. I don't fit in. The truth is that is what makes you memorable later on. I mean, okay, if we think about like famous secretaries of state, right? Do you remember all of like the random white guys, or do you remember Condoleezza Rice? I think probably you remember Condoleezza Rice, because it's like, oh my God, that's this like distinctive, successful woman. So the thing that may make it feel harder on the way in actually makes you stick and be incredibly successful once you are there.
Thank you so much, Dorie, for your presentation, your inspiration today, and to thank you to all of our listeners for your participation and your amazing questions. Really sorry we couldn't get to more. A recording of this presentation, including the slides, will be emailed to everyone in 2 weeks. As soon as the webinar has ended, a short survey will appear on your screen. We hope you'll take a few minutes to complete the survey and give us feedback on how we did and how we can improve. Please be on the lookout for more exciting membership webinars in 2022. We thank you for your attention today, and we hope you have a good day.